And we're going to get moving with the very first session, which focuses on our PO, our cross-cutting program, before I hand over to Daniel to lead Impact 1. So as you know, many of you know, the biological heritage is fortunate to be leading the program known as Ngā Rākau Takitaki, Saving Our Iconic Trees. Its development, the development of Ngā Rākau Takitaki, followed an announcement of a new investment into Kauri dieback and myrtle rust, specifically with the focus being to accelerate work that had already been done by government agencies, councils, research providers, Māori and interested groups. As you all know, because you're here, Kauri dieback is threatening Aotearoa New Zealand's treasured kauri with extinction, and myrtle rust is threatening many iconic native species as well as plants important to primary industries. More knowledge is urgently needed to underpin our approaches and to develop tools to fight these two pathogens. The name Ngā Rākau Takitaki reflects the historical connections Māori and other New Zealanders have with our kauri and our mutaisi trees. Takitaki in particular refers to the permanence of that relationship. So this program aims to protect and restore that relationship and that connection. That is why it's so important to many of us and why so many of us, including everyone online today, is passionate about Ngā Rākau Takitaki and in particular saving our ngāhere for the next generation. And that's probably a really nice segue into the first session, which is examining our cross-theme PO, Te Whakahononga. And so what I want to do in a minute is introduce the team or hand over to them to introduce themselves, and then they will lead us through a presentation before we open up for questions. So as I said, Te Whakahononga is a cross-cutting approach to working with mana whenua throughout the 7 themes of Ngā Rākau Takitaki. This session, as I said, will open with a PowerPoint and then we will go to Q&A. Again, reminder that the functions you'll need for this session are the questions and the chat rooms. Please keep an eye out for any poll questions that pop up, and a reminder for those not in Te Whakahononga to keep your cameras and your microphones off. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Waitangi Wood, Dave Milner, Julianne Cheetham, Albie Marsh and Tracy Godfrey to introduce themselves. Could I start by asking perhaps you, Albie, seeing as I know your camera, or Julianne, is working, a mic, to start by introducing yourselves. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou, ko Julianne Cheetham tōku ingoa no whangareia hau. I'm the co-lead on the host pathogen and environment theme of Ngā Rākau Takitaki, and also part of this group of Māori co-leads that has been developing the Te Whakahononga approach. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou, ko Albie Marsh tōku ingoa. I work at Plant and Food Research. I'm a researcher there. I'm also co-lead for Theme 7, Conservation Restoration, and I'm based in Palmerston North. Kia ora.
Morena koutou, ko Dave Milner taku ingoa, ko Patuara ki te hapu. I'm a co-lead for the Control, Protect, Cure theme, and also a part of the Te Whakahononga Māori co-lead team. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Tracy Godfrey tōku ingoa, no Ngāti Awa ki Rangitaiki ahau. I'm the project coordinator for Te Whakahononga. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Waitangi, are you there to introduce yourself as well?
Kia ora koutou. Ko Waitangi Wood tōku ingoa, no Ngāti Roa ki Whangaroa. I am on integrated surveillance within Anderson and Audrey Lustig, and working on this mahi with Te Whakahononga. Kia ora.
Kia ora whānau. So what we're going to do now is transition into a PowerPoint that this team are going to run us through before we open to Q&A. So Anna, would you mind putting the PowerPoint up, and I'll hand over to Te Whakahononga team to run us through the PowerPoint before we go to questions. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora koutou. I'll start the conversation. So as Mel's described, Ngā Raka Takitaki is made up of 7 themes, and within these themes there are 5 themes that have looked at integrating the research and as a way to engage effectively with Māori and to progress and develop research and science that's being led in Ngā Raka Takitaki. So the reason for this approach was so that we could focus on mātauranga Māori centric and kaupapa Māori research and embedded in this work that we're doing to address plant pathogens, kauri dieback, and also to empower kaitiaki to take action. The work also looks at the ways communities and mana whenua engaged and mobilised to participate within the mahi, and it looks at addressing the research across the different themes and elevating mana whenua into the science and research space. So Māori co-leads have developed a Whakahononga, it's a mana whenua integrated research plan to ensure that working relationships established through research on myrtle rust and kauri dieback recognise the tiriti o Waitangi and the rights and responsibilities of kaitiaki and rangatira as set out in Y262, the Statement of Claim, and that these are part of the Ngā Raka Takitaki's commitments. So connected to the science, we've identified that mana whenua want to work within the research and through in situ investigations and observations are able to discuss the ways that their intimacy with taonga can also be interfaced with the work that sits within the research and science space. We recognised from the outset that mana whenua needed to be engaged in the work, and that by having access to existing and emergent research information and data, that they're able to test and apply their own mātauranga and mōhio and determine mana whenua centric solutions to support the resilience of their taonga, determining their own solutions and approaches, and supporting the body of knowledge that we are assured will be advanced by this mahi. So the next slide, please. So one of the benefits of this program, this approach, is that we're looking at direct engagement between mana whenua and researchers and scientists, so nobody in the middle. It also provides an opportunity for mana whenua to have full disclosure of the science researchers and the people who are working within their area, sort of on-site regions, but also it gives them the opportunity to know the scientists and researchers that are providing the answers and solutions and responding to the problem we have with kauri dieback and myrtle rust. It is a way of recognising cultural licence because scientists and researchers recognise the provenance of the information and data, but also the taonga that they're working with. And mana whenua engaged early and able to contribute to the research development, and as a result are able to contribute to the research development. There's an holding, so multiple ways. One of those ways is around cultural capability and capacity, and contributing to the capacity of Māori to understand how science and research affect, and the decisions being made from science and research affect their work, and the decisions that are being made on the ground. And of course it responds to Tiriti and Y262. Next slide, please. Jules, do you want to talk to this?
Kia ora. So this slide basically just addresses the layers that the approach flows down through. So at the top you see the 5 themes that are involved in the Te Whakahononga Po. risk assessment and ecosystem impacts, integrated surveillance, the tools, control, protect, cure, host pathogen and environment, and conservation and restoration. So as part of that, all of those themes have this platform that enables their scientists and researchers to mahitahi with mana whenua through what we call biodiversity management areas, or BMAs, which are attached to rohe. And that allows that conversation and engagement to occur with individual research areas and projects under those themes. The second layer is what I sort of tend to refer to as bespoke mātauranga Māori projects or research areas. So the Māori co-leads have worked on with researchers and looking at the capacity and mahi that's already been occurring in various rohe, have developed up some concepts for sort of bespoke mātauranga Māori research, which is he tohu o te maramataka, te mauri o te ngahere, our cultural impact assessment program, and he taio. So these are looking at sort of cultural health indicators. These sit alongside the science approaches that are coming through the themes and align really well with those. So you might have, for example, the Kauri dieback epidemiology project from host pathogen and environment, which you'll hear about later, that involves observation and monitoring of a whole variety of environmental factors, and sitting alongside that will be the opportunity for mana whenua to develop their own tohu related to their own maramataka and their own unique individual understandings of their ngahere. So that is how they're intended to work together. The Mātauranga Māori projects are standalone, but they can be implemented and carried out alongside the research that's happening under the research areas of the different themes, for example. So there's a lot of ability for individual mana whenua to develop those research areas up in accordance with their own kaitiakitanga, their own research, their own mahi that's already underway in the ngahere, for example. And then how that gets rolled out is through these 16 biodiversity management areas, or BMAs, linked to a mana whenua. The way that is going to work is that there will be a tangata kōkiri, which is a individual that's a linker or a connector, and also a safeguarder, almost like a liaison of mana whenua. And then each mana whenua group has their own project lead and 2 kaitiaki that's all resourced through these five themes. And together, in a collaborative way, they'll be developing annual work plans that based on research area schedules. So the research area schedules have been populated by the themes, the theme co-leads, and we'll have a look at what that might look like in a minute. But every mana whenua group will have their own annual work plan, which is based on the research area schedules that either like the conservation and restoration theme or the tools theme have projects that they would like to undertake in your rohe. Then you as mana whenua can decide what level of engagement or involvement that you want to have. If there's part of that theme that you're really keen to develop up into your research area schedules, into your annual work plan, then that can occur if there are certain parts of the research that you're don't sit well with you, or you don't have the capacity to undertake those types of issues, then you can exclude those. So there's a high level of control for mana whenua that we perhaps haven't seen very much in the past in the science space.
Kia ora.
Do you want to add anything, anybody?
I think just to wrap that up, so the idea around this approach is to elevate mana whenua into the research and science space. In ngā raka takitaki, there are multiple research and science projects that require direct engagement with Māori. And so instead of putting Māori in a position and researchers in a position where they would be spending a lot of time developing the engagement, having the engagement before being able to take on go forward with their research or science. This approach allows us to front foot all of that activity and to engage directly earlier and in a way that allows Māori to be part of the research as the research progresses. The benefit of that is that mātauranga Māori at the beginning is balanced, where mātauranga Māori is being informed by science and research because Māori don't have intimacy with the ngangara. Scientists and researchers do, so the pathogens, but they do have intimacy with the environment and the ecosystems that those pathogens are affecting. And so if they're engaged earlier, our premise is that having more knowledge and having more engagement between science and Western knowledge holders and Indigenous knowledge holders, that will be able to evolve better outcomes for both, and that we will see a shift where Indigenous knowledge takes a lead. And that's what we're hoping to demonstrate with this approach. There are three parts to the approach, as Jules discussed. There is an initial research area schedule, which is a templated document that researchers and scientists complete, that's then provided to mana whenua to determine whether or not they want to progress that science or research, or to get some clarity around it. I just noticed that something else has come up on the screen, so I'm assuming that we're getting bobbed? Once that's done, there's a face-to-face meeting where Tracy Godfrey works with mana whenua to work through the different components that inform their work plan, and also their contracts and a cultural authority agreement, and then a cultural authority agreement is finalised with the program. And so that's how the Te Whakahononga approach works. We just had 2 slides, which I'll do real quickly, but I noticed that there's other slides up on the screen. Mal.
Just keep talking and we'll get those down. Thanks. Can you see what you got?
So we basically wanted just to show you really quickly, briefly, an image of what a Te Whakahononga research, a group of research projects that mana whenua may be engaged to one BMA, to give you a sense of how challenging that might be for researchers and scientists all going to engage with the same Māori in the same place, and how overwhelming it would be for Māori in terms of how many researchers and scientists that would want that they would be confronted with, if I could use that term. And so if I could show that, that would be great. But otherwise, and then the next slide we've got is basically to show you where the mana whenua in situ investigations would occur, and the elements that sit within the research and science programs that Māori will contribute to in terms of the work that they're contracted and progressing along with scientists for the next 2 years.
Right.
That's good, Koto. I think one of the key things around Te Whakahononga and NRT is historically the traditional sort of approach has been for research to be applied to mana whenua areas without mana whenua even being aware of or involved. And so what we're trying to do is front foot that and actually make sure that first and foremost mana whenua and the BMAs are aware of what is coming into their rohe, and to be able to get in early and introduce research to mana whenua to see if they're actually acceptable for that or not, or approve of that or not. And so this Te Whakahononga engagement po is really just front-footing that, introducing science to mana whenua, seeing if mana whenua are comfortable to support with their own local knowledge or not, and to see what research is available, and just coordinate it a lot more easier and formalise that process as well. So I think hopefully if we get the next 2 slides up, there'll be a good example to sort of explain what that looks like. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora. I might just ask a couple of questions while we sort out the teething problems around those slides, if that's okay, and that might help get us into a space where we might get a million other questions, I'm sure. So I have a question. I'm hoping this doesn't cut across what you're going to tell us in your next slides, and that is that all of you here on the screen in Waitangi are working on the ground with your hapu, with your iwi, with your whānau. So how is it, I think you're starting to talk about this just now, how is this approach different to what you typically experience as mana whenua trying to work with or engage with researchers?
I'll go so there's two parts to that conversation. The first one is when I'm engaging with whānau hapu at home, I'm engaging as hapu. In this conversation here, we've elevated out of, well, when I say elevated, I don't mean elevated higher. I mean that we're providing a perspective where we're supporting researchers and scientists to work directly with those mana whenua of those BMAs. And the difference is that mana whenua are engaged first, early. They have full disclosure of all the science and research, whereas at home they are engaged in the program as it goes. When information or research information or science is learnt about the ngangara or about the ecosystems that are existing or the tools that are being created, because I'm part of this program with Te Whakahononga, I would be engaged. I would know that at the same time that scientists and researchers and other agencies would know. Whereas at home on the ground, often or not, I wouldn't know much of that stuff until much later in the piece. So someone else may have been contacted or I may have been contacted. The level of information or data or sharing to me would be limited to the availability or the appetite of the researcher or the scientist to share that with me. I wouldn't be part of much of the development. There would be no resourcing, and if there was, it would be quite piecemeal because the resourcing is already allocated before the scientist across a project and committed across a project before they come and see Māori. So that's my view on that one.
Anyone else? Or?
Yeah, I think most people will have had experiences where you sort of get a phone call or an email from somebody saying that they'll be in your rohe the following week or within the next 3 days or something like that. And, you know, you can, if you're lucky, you get invited to come out and accompany them to see whatever research they're doing. And in the past, we've, you know, been given copies of the article or the research, again, if we specifically request that. So yeah, that's, I'm not saying that that's universal, but I think it probably is a pretty common experience for a lot of mana whenua. I think people are trying. I think, you know, so science and research institutes do want to do better. They just don't necessarily have the tools themselves to do better. So that's, I think that comes back to what Waitangi was just saying, that this is providing a straightforward pathway for scientists and researchers as well to know who to consult and or engage with, and how and what kind of information people hapu, iwi, kaitiaki are wanting or needing to be able to make informed decisions and engage to the level that they would like to do. So.
Thanks, Charles. Albie, you were going to add to that?
Was I? Kia ora. Not really. Yeah, I suppose what we needed to look at was the whole program of Ngā Rākau Taketake, and we have 5 themes signed up to Te Whakahononga. What we didn't want to see is 5 themes approaching the same 5 rohe and wanting to work with them. So this was about bringing coordination to that approach, so that it was one approach that we made to a mana whenua group that we were wanting to work with, and then designing a work plan around the 5 themes that had signed up to the program. So rather than being bombarded by individuals wanting to work with them, this was more about bringing all 5 themes wanting to work with one individual rohe and coordinating the work plan that enabled that to happen in a cohesive manner. So it made it a lot easier for mana whenua to plan out the work program that's aligned to the different themes that they were doing work for. So if you understood that, then you're a genius.
So if I can, so just maybe support that genius. So this is what you have now is an example of 17 of the 30-something research proposals that sit within Ngā Rākau Taketake that require engagement with mana whenua. So there's 17 of them. So so there are various stages of engagement. So we're saying that instead of coming in later, or if you have to go and pick taonga or seed, instead of going at that stage, that actually these 17 need to engage at the outset of their research. And we want to acknowledge the co-leads, other co-leads, and other and the NRT leadership group for actually supporting and enabling this to happen, because this wouldn't have gone through if we didn't have supported and prioritisation of mana whenua engagement and appropriate cultural arrangements in place before the research. So this slide here is an example of all the research, and so what we did was we determined from that research, and this work this is advised through the research area schedules. And so if you go to the next slide, which is our last slide, and then you can click off on that. And this is basically what comes out of the work. So there's cultural authority arrangements, there's work in situ, there's investigations, there's working around developing up frameworks and ways to assess impact. There are monitoring and surveillance, there's taonga collection, there's development of mātauranga Māori solutions, there's testing, checking for cultural license. So a whole gamut of things that sit within that research that actually Māori are doing and can do. And so what we're doing with the Te Whakahononga approach is we've pulled those out, found where the alignment is within the research and science over the next year or so, and have mana whenua working directly with the researchers and scientists. The difference between that approach and an approach where, as Julian says, someone comes and just phones you, or you might get a publication, or you may be engaged at the end point when there's a part that the researcher requires, is substantial. It's a substantial difference. It's a game changer. That if this is possibly adopted across the research and science space, it means it'll alleviate a number of things. It'll alleviate cultural license, for the issues around cultural license, and this conversation that we don't know which Māori to talk to, because you'll have Māori directly working and establishing strong strategic trust relationships with scientists and researchers for future research and science projects and initiatives. I hope that answered the question. Kia ora.
Oh, yeah, it did. And I guess that probably leads into another question I had, which is on this slide, and that was that we hear a lot about cultural authority agreements in the Bioheritage Challenge. So could you tell us a wee bit about what they are and why they're so important?
Kia ora. Okay, I'll start and then we can get a... No. Get one toy and then go back out. One toy. Sorry, I'm in a playroom. One toy.
Why does someone else want to, Julianne, want to take that question? Why are the cultural authority agreements so important? They're not standard, you don't see those as standard across other research programs or organisations, although they're more common now, aren't they?
the ones that are being developed up for this approach are based on a project that came out of the Cody Dieback program, and that was called the Healthy Trees, Healthy Futures project. And that was developed up with a number of us who were on the Tangata Whenua Rōpū at that time for Cody Dieback, and in conjunction with Scion. And a number of those scientists that were involved are involved in Ngā Rākau Takitaki now. So that was basically based on what Waitangi's been saying on ensuring that the ownership, the control and authority over knowledge and taonga materials can be, sorry, my screen can be, you know, the linkages to where that has come from can be appropriately maintained and recognised and cared for. So it's really, at its basis level, you could call it intellectual property, but it's more about enhancing the mana of those hapu and iwi whānau on the ground that are involved, and it's about ensuring that I think what has happened is people have given permissions or have been involved on occasion historically, but then the material or the information that they have potentially given permission to be utilised by the science fraternity then goes into it's not the ether, but it goes into a system where it can then be used multiple times by others, and there's sort of the link and the connection is lost, and then you might not know that your material that you gathered for something is then being utilised for multiple other research in 10 years time or 20 years time, and it's no longer being linked back to you and your rohe. So it's really about it's basic stuff like that, but I think it starts with a sort of triggers document process where scientists can work through with mana whenua a whole range of questions. How do you feel about this? Or what do you think if we used your material in this way? Or is it, you can start to get into those really sticky questions around, genetic information and how genetic information might be being used or manipulated. So there's a whole range of, I don't want to say permissions, but there's a whole range of relationships with your taonga or your knowledge that you're sharing that need to be sort of not ticked off, but gone through quite a comprehensive list to ensure that you as the owners of that information and that resource are really clear of, and the scientists are really clear of all the ways in which that can be used or shared, and any information, any research or work or that can be shared widely afterwards or utilised or commercialised in some way is clearly you have control and a measure of control or ownership depending on what has been agreed to that information, and you're appropriately acknowledged in any research, publications and things like that. I feel like this is a very convoluted answer.
So can I say it's the cultural authority agreements, if I could just sum that a little bit. The cultural authority agreements are a pragmatic approach to the fact that scientists and researchers are having direct impact or using and accessing taonga. And taonga under Article 2 has a cultural authority and a strong relationship with Māori or mana whenua. So because the funding comes from the Crown, it's Crown funding, there is an expectation that agencies, bodies and groups that use Crown funding in science and research that they engage directly with the mana whenua, the Crown partner, the treaty partner, and to talk about the way in which that science and research is going to impact that taonga. So scientists and researchers use publications. It's a currency. It's a research. It's part of a publications. You know, we recognise that as currency, and so so a lot of publications don't go to Māori about the work that's gone on in their regions or in their rohe or in their forests or in their oceans without Māori having cited any of those things. And quite often those things will be a way of rewriting or redetermining a Māori or mana whenua narrative. In addition to that, Māori have the right under that authority under the Te Tiriti to have a say and to protect, be in a position to protect their taonga. And so if scientists and researchers are taking that taonga, whatever that is from those respective areas, mana whenua should be in those conversations. And what the cultural authority agreements do, they set the parameters for the engagement, for the purpose, of the research, for who is doing the research, for the timeframes for the research, and what are the outcomes of the research, and it now enables mana whenua the ability to be able to have controls over the way their taonga, information and data about their taonga is being utilised by researchers and scientists and eventually agencies and other groups. So that's the cultural authority arrangement.
Thanks, Waitangi. I actually have a question from Kate Nolan, which follows really nicely on from this conversation. But Kate, I'm going to unmute you and maybe you can ask it yourself, given that you, as you said in your question, it might be a wee bit garbled. So maybe you can explain it better than I can ask it. Is that okay, Kate, if I unmute you? And well, I'm going to anyway, so there you go. I know. Hopefully we can, if you can unmute and ask. If I can't unmute you. No, maybe I can't. If we can't get her, I'll try and attempt her question. Kate basically says, it sounds like the cultural agreement process relies more widely on safe data infrastructure that adopts levels of a stop-go security levels for information access. Are there conversations that reach into the design and implementation of data architecture?
Are there conversations that reach into the design of an architecture
of data architecture?
In terms of the way in which Māori perceive the data and information being produced by scientists and researchers or being gleaned from?
I think what Kate's saying is, look, you know, your cultural safety sounds like a way of protecting and providing the stop-go, as Julianne was saying, a stop-go kind of protection around information flow. So are you looking at data infrastructure around protecting?
So, okay, so Māori have always protected their information and data. You know, Māori have always been very protective of the way in which our narrative is being relayed. We have a thing called taonga tupu iho, which is intergenerational sharing of information and data. Our culture is through an oral tradition. With technology and those types of things, and also wider social networks and media picking up the way in which Māori articulate their existence or their lens on the world. These things are shared more widely, but ultimately the source of the data, it's just like anything that's you know, within integrated surveillance we talk about data being temporal, so it has authenticity at the time that it's actually loaded to a website or to a social media platform. And even if it's not true, even if it's not someone's truth, it's actually seen as authentic at that time of loading. Well, that's the same with Māori in terms of this is just one perspective. I know that others in our group may have others, but the information, it comes from a source. We have a validity around that source. That information is transferred in the way that that it's been heard. And with new technologies, we're able to, you know, be more sophisticated about that. But certainly, Māori have always had ways of having methods and approaches of protecting information and data, because that basically is our narrative. That's the way we describe ourselves, and that's the way we retain our cultural individuality or distinction. that's my thought on that.
Right. I have time for one more question before we have to wrap up, and that's one that came through the chat room to me, which says that asks how have or are mana whenua responding to the Te Whakahononga approach, and is this empowering them in their research and knowledge in their rohi, or is this supporting them with their research and knowledge in their rohi? So how have mana whenua responded at first to the Te Whakahononga approach?
Oh, I'm so sorry I'm taking up so much of this conversation, but this was actually a piece of work for this approach. So we've fielded it with, we've already had initial conversations with mana whenua about an integrated research approach that allows them to view the information and data, the research projects, and to front foot this work, and also the option to say whether or not they want to be involved or not, and at what level. So obviously Māori are waiting and interested in how this will be progressed, and for the most part mana whenua are happy with the approach. In fact, some are quite ecstatic with the approach because it is something that's new, and it is something that well, the approach, the integration of all the research is new. The cultural authority arrangements, as Julian said, has been used across some of the other CRIs, and so we've been able to adapt that. And so we know that because mana whenua generally want to be involved in research and science, they want to be knowing what they also want to have solutions for Kauri, dieback, and murder rust and other pathogens that are affecting our taonga, and they want direct relationships with scientists and researchers to find information out that support their better management and kaitiaki of their taonga. So obviously this is good for them. They have received it warmly.
Thank you, Waitangi.